Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, their convention is over. And Republican leaders seem united like never before around Donald Trump. With an assassination attempt behind him and a new running mate by his side, how strong is Trump's candidacy heading into the election? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. On Thursday night, Donald Trump accepted the Republican nomination for President of the United States. Hours before that happened, I talked to Republican political strategist Rina Shah.
I'm a longtime political strategist and commentator. I was also a 2016 delegate to the Republican National Convention, and I'm a senior advisor to numerous efforts like Republican Women for Progress.
Well, it's really good to have you here. So, Rina, you are also a registered Republican, and members of your party just spent the past 4 days rallying around Donald Trump for the third Republican convention in a row. I know he's not someone that you support, though. So what has it been like this week to watch this?
Well, in 2016, he rolled into the Republican National Convention as the presumptive nominee after having won the primaries, but there were still defections like the Never Trump movement that led to the Free the Delegates movement on the floor of the convention. All very interesting inside baseball that essentially says that in 2016, there were far more skeptics about Donald J. Trump than there are now. The party's been completely remade in his image, as it's been said the world over many times over the past 8 years. But look, what you're seeing now is a complete coronation after what was a really tough fall. The fall held real glimmers of hope for Republicans like me, and I'm of the stripes of Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, for example, extremely critical of Trump, his administration, and his ambitions for the future. I think that you can still remain a conservative, whether fiscal or social in some ways, and be opposed to Donald Trump being the Republican name on the ballot for president this year.
Senator Mitt Romney, among those Republicans who did not show up at the RNC, you also are one of those who did not go because, as you said, you don't feel like this is your party. But from the coverage of it and what you've heard, what do you make of what we've seen?
It's always a choice to turn up at these events, but every 4 years, there's always something to get excited for when you're gathering with people who say they're just like you from coast to coast. These speeches, as I've watched them from afar over the past few days, were not only completely cult-like, if I may, they reminded me more as if they were praising a king of England rather than a would-be U.S. president.
2 days ago, evil came for the man we admire and love so much. I thank God that his hand was on President Trump.
On Saturday, the devil came to Pennsylvania holding a rifle, but an American lion got back up on his feet and he roared.
I felt really uncomfortable as I watched people like Senator Ted Cruz, whose wife has been mocked, whose family has been not just criticized, but spread lies about by Donald Trump. I mean, these are people that have completely bowed at the altar of Trumpism for nothing more than personal gain of money and power. This is not how political parties should work in this country. We should be aspiring to have conversations that spread our message further than the party perimeter and bring in new people that are looking for a home. More Americans than ever are politically homeless and apathetic. This past week in Milwaukee could have represented a turning point for the Republican Party. They chose not to take it.
Well, speaking of speeches by people who've been mocked by Trump, many of those who are rallying around Trump are former political opponents of his, people who ran against him in the Republican primary. Nikki Haley, who once called Trump unhinged and who he called a bird brain. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who Trump has regularly mocked in the past. And then fast forward to the present, and we saw both Haley and DeSantis endorsing Trump this week.
I'll start by making one thing perfectly clear. Donald Trump has my strong endorsement, period.
Donald Trump has been demonized. He's been sued. He's been prosecuted, and he nearly lost his life. We cannot let him down, and we cannot let America down.
It's not uncommon that candidates who've lost primaries end up rallying around the nominee. It's less common that the nominee has personally insulted and attacked them. So what do you think these endorsements say about Trump's hold on the party?
If I may, I have to zero in on Nikki Haley's endorsement. That's been the one that's been not puzzling, but the one that's been the most disappointing because she did make more than a dent in the Republican primary. She was the last person standing after a crowded field. DeSantis was not so surprising. He tends to be like Trump in some ways, but Nikki Haley fought back with some real substance this past fall from the debate stage.
You have Ron DeSantis, you've got Tim Scott, you've got Mike Pence. They all voted to raise the debt. And Donald Trump added $8 trillion to our debt. And our kids are never going to forgive us for this. And so
this is a person that had what I felt like was real teeth in her arguments. She talked about humanizing women and not demonizing them when it came to the topic of abortion in a way that I almost felt it could appeal to women who were center left. Again, that's been the toughest one to see, and it makes one wonder about her future ambitions. Certainly, she has her sights set on 2028. There's no reason for her to have lived this many political lives and then rear her head and go into the lion's den for any other reason but to mend fences with MAGA, which she feels like still has the power in the party.
This is just an aside, but it's so interesting how from 2016 to 2024, MAGA is just a thing we know. But in case for our international audience, how would you describe MAGA?
Yeah, it's a movement. It's the one that Trump started in 2016, the Make America Great Again movement, which has the red hats with those very words emblazoned on them. And you know, the Red Hat Brigade, as they've been referred to, has taken to a new slogan this time around, and it's Keep America Great. But you don't hear that as much. You really only hear MAGA. But I must say, we have the empirical evidence that shows that MAGA is dwindling in size. It's certainly not an influence in the party, but in size, yes. And as a chunk of the American electorate, no doubt it's getting smaller. So there's a sense here that MAGA has power and money, and Nikki Haley wanted a taste of that pie. I think that's why she chose to take to the RNC stage and give her endorsement to a man who she seemed to have great personal animus with.
So, Rina, let's talk about another one of those people who was once at odds with Trump and is now his vice presidential nominee. JD Vance, senator from Ohio. Vance was previously a so-called never Trump Republican, like you still are. And he's on record making some scathing comments about the former president. Vance compared Trump to Hitler, called him an idiot, as well as noxious, reprehensible. And then on Wednesday, we didn't hear any of that.
For the last 8 years, President Trump has given everything he has to fight for the people of our country. He didn't need politics, but the country needed him.
So talk to me about who JD Vance is and what you thought of his introduction to the world stage on Wednesday night.
JD Vance is under the age of 40, a father of 3, hails from rural Appalachia, a part of the country I know well because I myself am from there. I'm born and raised in southern West Virginia. JD Vance's story is interesting in many ways, not just because he came out from a very, very tough childhood that was marked with addiction and a single mother, generational poverty also. He wrote a bestseller called Hillbilly Elegy, and that's how the great American public got to know him. But the most concerning part about him is not his backtracking on his personal views of Donald Trump, but the most radical views he's expressed about American women, calling many of them childless and cat owners, and these are the women who are just determining policies for our nation. He's also at some point said that he would still be anti-abortion in the case of incest and rape. That is a really, really minority view, even in the Republican Party. So I am concerned because of his naked ambition. He seems to have done an about-face on Trump because he wants money, because he wants power. His wife comes from California, a progressive part of the country where she was involved, I believe, in progressive law firms. But I do think there's just one thing here that we should look at, and it's that Donald Trump is old too. He's approaching 80.
Yeah.
He's only 3 years Biden's junior. If Donald Trump perishes, you have this VP, and that scares me like nothing else.
So just how strong is the Trump-Vance ticket heading into November? That's after the break. So, Rina, I pulled up X and you tweeted after Vance's speech on Wednesday that RNC's speech from the first millennial VP hopeful spoke to almost no one. JD Vance didn't bring any charisma, nor did he add anything different. The whole thing read like a boring bio in a high school theater program booklet. Why do you think that is?
It was milquetoast. He doesn't have a style. Obama, the great orator, even if you didn't like him, you didn't like his policies, you were listening.
Mm-hmm.
This is a time where, we know how Trump succeeded, making politics sensationalized, like it was entertainment, like a reality show, like The Apprentice almost, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to have somebody so milquetoast standing next to you who essentially is just talking about himself to the world? What about the ideas for young families like mine? I've got 3 children. Childcare is crushing. Even for me to do an interview is constantly a compromise. And this is my work. This is my line of work. American women are balancing too much because we no longer have a support system.
Yeah.
JD Vance spoke about none of that. It was boring in every way. It was a missed opportunity for him. And I have to be very frank with the audience here. I potentially, and look, this is where Never Trump gets dicey, maybe could have flipped my vote to Republican.
Wow.
If he had named a woman as moderate as Haley.
I see. Yeah. But instead, he doubled down, really. He doubled down on the MAGA ethos.
Yeah, he did. And that's not a strategically good move. He doesn't have a problem with white men. He has a problem with suburban women. And though he's married to one, she kind of doesn't seem to give off any vibes of togetherness and unity. You can talk about unity, you can use that word, but your actions show the world. And when you've got such draconian views on women in American society, I've got to be honest, they should be prepared to lose because he adds nothing to the ticket. A woman like Haley could have had mass appeal in certain pockets of the country. And look, the people that are going to vote Biden and Democrat, the most ardent supporters of the Democrat Party would never change their mind. But there's a whole segment of the electorate that's out there for grabs.
Right.
80 million Americans didn't show up in 2020. We have no good data to tell us what they're going to do this time. Why wouldn't Republicans take the chance at staring them in the face, do a rewrite, dump Trumpism, make it a party that talks about opportunity, gives a sense that all are welcome, expands the tent as they've been talking about for decades?
So, Rina, what are you hearing in Washington about how strong a Trump-Vance ticket is heading into a general election against, for now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in November?
There is a sense that Republicans could wipe the floor with the Biden-Harris ticket simply because people are starting to look at Joe Biden as too infirm. But do I believe Joe Biden is a good man who wants the best for this country? I actually do. Do I think he's been in public service too long? I actually do. I think you hold those two views at the same time.
Yeah.
But there is this fear that Trump, even though he was kicked out in 2020, and we as a nation, historically speaking, don't take a chance on that again, on a loser. Just being blunt here, that's the facts. He lost in 2020, and he's kept saying that he hasn't, but he did. So in general, people are not going to go say, you know what, let's go back to that. People, I fear, want to stay home, and that's what everybody in Washington is buzzing about.
Well, you mentioned a fact that unfortunately is not a fact for so many people, and that is that Trump says he won when he didn't in 2020. How much did the election fraud claims that played into the insurrection come up at the convention, and how much do you think they'll continue to come up in the lead up to November? Because the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th were so monumental, and yet here we are, 2024, and they don't seem to be a major talking point. In fact, several of the delegates who voted to nominate Trump and Vance were at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th.
I am so disappointed every time I hear of the embrace of the insurrectionists, fellow Americans who thought it was fine to try to overthrow our government. The embrace of them by Trump and, again, his cronies really is disappointing because it's something they didn't have to do. Hundreds of Americans have been jailed, have been found guilty by courts of law. The hundreds of Americans that tried to storm the Capitol and did actually and rioted on it and tried to kill members of Congress. Those people have been found guilty, and many of them have remorse. And they understand when they try to go out and do Trump's bidding, Trump looks out for no one but himself. But one thing that I've heard from the convention stage this week is that those people were victims of a big, deep state and of Democrats in the government, just like Donald Trump is. But I made my entire career in the Republican Party by choice because I thought this was the party that didn't scream about victimization, that didn't see ourselves as victims. January 6th insurrectionists are not victims. They're people that our founders of this nation created the Constitution for, so that they could be held responsible and accountable to the same rule of law that any former president is.
So, Rina, looking back on how the Republican Party got to this point, are there mistakes you think that more moderate members of the party made in the past in terms of rhetoric, policy positions, that allowed things to get to a point where this is a party led by Trump, full stop, and one you no longer recognize?
When I think about the moderates, people like me, I think about the onus on us, really what we should bear responsibility for, and it's for not having been loud enough. I talk a great deal about abortion and reproductive care and access earlier. In places like my home state of West Virginia, rural women suffer, Black and brown women suffer when there's not adequate access to reproductive care.
Yeah.
And that's who I care about. I don't care what the color of your skin is. I don't care what religion you practice. I don't care what your sexual orientation is or whether you're a mother or child free by choice. We have some values here that we always believed in, and freedom was the foremost of those. And so I was taken aback the other day when somebody from Donald Trump's team, who I was on air with on another network, he said to me, well, how long have you been a Republican? I said, sir, my whole life. And I've served 2 Republican members of the House. He asked me that simply because I expressed my pro-choice position. I have always been pro-choice, as have people like, there's the great strategist Roger Stone, who served Trump. His ex-wife, Ann Stone, was influential in the early years of Republican Women for Choice, and she's much older than me. So I, under the age of 40, and women who are 70 who are Republican, we have been pro-choice because it goes along with the party's message of freedom. Moderates needed to be louder about this. We needed to be more steadfast and resolute in conveying this message of no, it doesn't make sense to try to legislate and govern women's bodies and choices. Freedom means not having the government in my bank account, my backyard, my bedroom, and certainly not the doctor's exam room.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Ashish Malhotra, Tamara Khandaker, and Sonia Bhagat, with Veronique Eshaya, Duha Mosaad, Manahil Naveed, Mohammed Zain Shafi Khan, and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Plourde mixed this episode. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.